I can see how the world, physically and socially, is a complex place, and we need to take that into account when we study things like bullying, obesity, and educational systems. But does this apply to us as learners and researchers as well?
Good question. Yes, that's really where we want to apply it as educators, to ourselves. This idea of complex ecologies doesn't just apply to what we study. It applies to us as learners as well. We are complex systems that adapt to our contexts. Davis sometimes refers to this as complexity thinking, this sort of reflexive turning back on ourselves as researchers. And it goes a step beyond just using complexity science frameworks on the people and systems we interact with. Our learning and knowing as individuals are complex and relational too. We cannot simply be filled with knowledge or trained like machines. When we learn, we adapt ourselves, our knowledge, and our behaviors to adapt or cope effectively with our contexts. Knowing and learning are what allow us to maintain viability, fitness, or coherence in relation to our contexts.
Could you speak to this idea of coherence? It remains a pretty mystifying concept for me.
As Piaget pointed out, we like what we know to be internally coherent, in the sense that our knowledge or beliefs allow us to interact effectively or viably with our physical and social world. For example, if I believe I can fly, that won't work very well when I jump off a building. And if I treat students and colleagues like feudal serfs, I will probably be fired. But none of this means that our knowledge is an objective representation of the way the world itself is. It just means that our knowledge fits or works in our current contexts. Ideas change all the time, and lots of different people have different schemas of beliefs while still being able to interact effectively with the world. For example, many different sorts of knowledge have helped people in different cultures to grow agricultural crops, construct buildings, navigate using celestial bodies like stars, or negotiate social structures like families, workplaces, or governments. Our knowledge or knowing is therefore better seen as a complex, evolving tool rather than an objective picture of the way the world itself is.
I can see how that applies to one person, but what about groups of people?
This complex, relational, ecological view of learning and knowing applies to larger collectives like professions or disciplines as well. These social bodies have to have internal coherence in their knowledge as well, in the sense that there are at least some commonly talked about ideas and practices that hold the field together. And they have to have external coherence in the sense that the disciplines and professions must adapt to their context, such as student or patient needs, mental health trends, electronic developments like cell phones, public demands, government rules, and new bacterial or virological superbugs. But again, this disciplinary and professional knowledges are evolving toolboxes, not objective representations, since the theories and best practices have always changed and will likely change in the future.
Okay, I'm still feeling a little shaky about it all. What's the take-home message from this chapter and all of these ideas?
Linked to this idea of knowledge or knowing is a different idea of learning. If you get nothing else from this course, please remember what Piaget, Davis et al., and my assertion say that learning is about self-organized adaptation, not taking in or acquiring knowledge or skills as if they are some kind of object and our head is some kind of container. Finally, it is worth noting that the complexity and ecology approaches of systematic sustainability education focus on interconnections, not simplistic differences or dichotomies, which apparently we're biologically and culturally predisposed to both notice and amplify. Theme of the book. Much of our current thinking and political debates are organized around rigid black and white conventional dichotomies like right and wrong, liberal or conservative, teacher-centered or student-centered, competitive or cooperation, and so on. People often think that these dichotomies are the only possibilities. Complexity and ecology thinkers argue that most of these apparent dichotomies are really simultaneities or bifurcations. They're often interconnected or linked to each other and share common assumptions. For example, the way teacher-centered and student-centered education both assume that learning and education are only about individuals. The authors argue that these common sense assumptions only represent one possible path, and, in fact, there are many other possible paths that one can take or create.
Maybe what the authors wish us to learn is that ultimately what has been done so far does not represent all that is possible. It just represents the paths and branching points that have been laid down so far.
That's exactly it. Progress usually involves laying down a new path, not choosing sides in an existing debate. One final neat thing I found in Brent Davis's slides are some tips on how to become more high complexity in your thinking. Here they are. I'll let you read them.